Oscar the Hermit Olson. Oscar Olson came to Anna Maria Island in the 30s following the death of his wife. Harry Varley, editor of the First Islander, wrote, "Born in Sweden in 1872, Oscar was an orphan at 12 and at 16 joined the Swedish Navy, served his time, and then went to England where he became a sailor in windjammers that sailed the seven seas. One voyage took him 5 months to sail from London to Darwin, Australia, where he jumped ship. He became a clown and an acrobat with a traveling circus, where he learned sleight of hand from the magician. He tried pearl fishing, working off the north tip of Australia. The natives were cannibals, and when pearl fishers went ashore for food and water, it was a question as to whether they would eat or be eaten. His longest trip without touching land was a 7-month voyage from New Zealand to a port on the Baltic Sea. He'd been to many countries in both hemispheres and has a tale from almost every port. He had a parrot that spoke a little Spanish. Once when he was hungry, he decided to sell the bird so he could buy some food. A man on the street offered him 1 peso for the bird. Oscar wanted 2. In the violent argument that erupted, the frightened bird took off and flew to a nearby roof. There went Oscar's dinner. In the 1930s, Oscar arrived on Anna Maria Island in a 1926 Chevrolet. He drove up to the North Point, where Wagner's fishing camp was located. In bad weather, he slept in his car, and in good weather, a small tent was his home. He found a boat which he patched and painted and then rented it out by the day. Oscar's business on the island had started. Gradually, his car disintegrated. Friends built him a small cabin at the Holmes Beach Yacht Basin, where he took care of boats and dug in his garden. Mostly he loved to sit in the sun and chat with selected cronies. Varley said, "Oscar was called the Hermit. No name could be more wrong. He is a pleasant, polite gentleman who loves to relate stories of his life and escapades, such as being arrested in Scotland with a shipmate, 2 girls, and a bottle of whiskey, for partying in a farmer's haystack, and those terrible months on a West American island where he was starved and beaten and would have died if a ship had not put into port because it needed crew members. One of Oscar's best days came when he was working as a steeplejack in Boston. He painted 4 flagpoles in a single day and earned the fantastic sum of $600. A bad day when he received only $7.50 from an investment of $1,500 on Wall Street. Oscar was strong and healthy and enjoyed life to the limit. He gave up smoking at 80 and didn't drink liquor. In 1955, when Oscar was asked by the Islander to pose for a picture, he turned a handspring for the photographer and wound his legs around his neck to prove he could do it at 83. On this page, there's a picture of the Hermit. He's just standing there by the water. You'll enjoy seeing it. Chapter 24, Early Island Educators, J. Hartley Blackburn, Betty Blackburn, Lena Phelps. J. Hartley Blackburn was born in Madison, Florida in 1908, the son of a circuit rider preacher. He was one of 12 children. Hartley came to Anna Maria Island in the 1930s. While he was attending Columbia University in New York, he was stricken with a severe case of rheumatoid arthritis. The crippling disease involved the entire spine, and in a short time he was immobile. According to his daughter, Betty Lou Huth, the doctors advised him to go to Florida on a stretcher to die. They told him to get as much sun and seawater as possible. If he would do this, he might live another 6 months. He established his residence in a house at the end of the city pier. Daily he was lowered into the water and baked in the sunshine. Within a year he was able to walk without crutches, and within 2 years He could get around very well and had regained the full use of his legs. On this page is a picture of island sweethearts. J. Hartley Blackburn and his bride, Betty Phelps, were lovers of the sea and outstanding educators. They were married in 1934. It was while living in the cottage on Pilings that he met Betty Phelps, who spent the summer on Anna Maria with her brother and sister-in-law, Clyde and Lena Phelps. Betty was the first woman captain of a life-saving team in the state and spearheaded the building of a large diving platform where she practiced and performed exhibitions. The tower stood for many years in the Gulf out from the Sandbar restaurant. On several occasions, Hartley and Betty spent hours on the tower taking refuge from the sharks swimming around it. The original pilings stood until they rotted away in the 1950s. After a storybook courtship on the pristine island, they were married on June the 3rd, 1934. Hartley and Betty were lovers of the sea. Life revolved around Rosa Church and the Blackburn and Phelps families. They were both educators, and their first teaching assignments were at the two-room Cortez School. He was principal, and she was a teacher. Years later, he was elected superintendent of public education for Manatee County, a position he held for 27 years. Hartley was an educational pioneer and brought modern education to Manatee County from preschool through junior college. On this page is a picture of mother and daughter, Betty Lou Blackburn Huth and her mother, Betty. They spent many days on the beach examining creatures from the sea. They rode horses and were avid bird watchers. One of my early recollections of Daddy and Mama was when they sandbagged our house at the end of Magnolia on the Gulf, recalls Betty Lou. The house was about to wash into the Gulf during a violent hurricane. I awakened to screaming wind and water crashing on the front porch. I called my parents, but they didn't hear me, so I went to a neighbor's house. When they looked for me and I was gone, they were terrified, but were relieved to find me safe with our friends. They did save the house, and it was later moved to the North Point. Hartley and Betty were active at Rosa Church. They were trustees on a number of committees and taught Sunday school. When classes were too large, they moved the children to the front porch of their house across the street called Cozy Corner. They served faithfully for 40 years at the church, the center of spiritual and social life on the island. They lived in Cozy Corner while their new house on White Avenue was being built. Cozy Corner still stands on Pine Avenue. Betty Lou has fond memories of the home on White Avenue. It was a wonderful place to grow up, she said. We had a horse paddock in the back and would ride them up the beach and let them swim in the Gulf. Mother and I would even ride them to school, the IGA grocery store, and the post office. In the late 30s, Betty taught in the one-room island schoolhouse on Magnolia Avenue, where the community center stands now. When there were too many children, they held classes in the community hall, which is now the Island Players Playhouse. Betty said her mother was an outdoor person, an avid bird watcher, and would hold her classes outdoors whenever the weather permitted. Betty Lou went through 6 grades in the old schoolhouse and then to Walker Junior High School in Bradenton. In September of 1934, Lena Phelps took over the Anna Maria School as the only teacher. Times were hard. That year, school opened with 11 pupils and reached a total of 72 during the season. The salary for teaching in 6 grades for 8 months was $560. After this, things began to improve. In the late 1930s, it was necessary to add a second room, and in February 13, 1950, the school moved out of the old building to its present location in Holmes Beach. There were 4 teachers and just over 100 students. Mrs. Phelps was the first principal. Born in Alabama, Lena came to Palmasola when she was 3. She worked tirelessly with enthusiasm and with discipline. Lena and her husband Clyde were charter members of Rosa Church, where they served faithfully in many capacities. Clyde was known on the island for his wisdom in growing all types of vegetables and owned Phelps's nursery. He was the first turtle man and for years tenderly cared for baby sea turtles. Clyde enjoyed talking about the early days on the island. About the roads, he reported, "A few houses were in Anna Maria and Bradenton Beach. There was nothing in between. You traveled on 2 shell ruts, and if you met another car and got out of the ruts, you were stuck in the sand." The Phelpses lived in a house on the grounds of their nursery. In an interview with a local newspaper reporter, Clyde related all the details of being chased up a buttonwood tree by a 6-foot alligator. Now on this page, there's a picture of Lena and Clyde Phelps, and on the next page, a picture of Cozy Corner with the Blackburns and the Phelps gathering on the Blackburns at the Blackburns' home on Pine Avenue. "I was walking along the lake across from my house when I spied the gator. Generally, when tapped with a stick, they would scurry away. Not this one. It came after me with his mouth wide open. I was forced to climb that buttonwood tree and stay up there until Mayor Mitch Davis's son Bill shot it." Lena initiated the making of an annual bird book by each student. This practice continued for many years. Her pupils gained knowledge and appreciation from nature from her. "Staying after school with Aunt Lena was not fun," Betty Lou recalls, "but I did learn my multiplication tables that way. Just because she was my aunt and principal of the school and Daddy was superintendent didn't allow me any special favors. I was punished for talking in class, not doing homework, and once skipping school to go swimming. All the children would bring their lunches and ate under the large oak trees. Recess was a race to see who would be first up the huge oak to swing in a giant arc on the burlap bag swing," according to Betty Lou. The trees were sandhill oaks. They were strong, with gnarled low limbs which the children loved to climb. This was truly a community school, and many island residents contributed. Field trips were made under Mrs. Phelps' leadership, and the climax came each year when she took the 6th graders to Bayaca State Park for a weekend campout. She felt one of the valuable contributions that could be made to a child is to open his eyes to the beauty of the world around him. Chapter 25, A True Islander, Elizabeth Moss. This following was written by Elizabeth Moss for a biographical book at the Anna Maria Island Historical Museum, where she serves as a docent. There's a picture of Elizabeth on this page. It doesn't say how old she is in the picture, but you'll find she's just as pretty as she is now. "I'm not famous or even distinguished. However, my picture's been in the Islander about 5 times. When I became engaged to Jean, when a reporter caught me planting peanuts in the City Hall yard during Jimmy Carter's campaign, when I was in costume with a group of Historical Society members, when Jean and I were dancing at the Anna Maria Volunteer Fire Department Halloween dance, and when Jean and I raised gigantic sunflowers. My life has no business being in this book except for one thing. I've lived on the island a long time and have had the privilege of knowing some really great island citizens. Furthermore, I love this island. I'll write a few memories of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I grew up in Bartow, Polk County, about 80 miles from here. I first came to the island in 1921 when I was 4. In the summertime, everybody went to the beach. Lots of Bartowans owned cottages in Anna Maria. By the time Polk County natives came to Anna Maria and not Anna Maria, and they still do. I should read that again. By the way, Polk County natives came to Anna Maria and not Anna Maria, and still do. Mr. Albinson was a Bartow contractor who built several houses on the island. His daughters were my school friends, and they often invited me to spend the weekend on the island. We were a delighted bunch when we stayed with the Albinson family. in the beautiful English house or the castle next door at the end of Beach Avenue. The English manor house has been torn down for a small development. Regretfully, during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, I didn't care anything about the island's history or even what was currently going on. I came to enjoy the beach, and I did. The beach was very wide, lots of shells, hardly any people, plenty of blue crabs to scoop up at night, and lots of fish to catch any time. At low tide, we would bike on the beach all the way to Bradenton Beach without beach renourishment. There was never any red tide until the summer of 1947. There is a picture of the Moss homestead on this page, and she says, "In 1943, my family bought the house at the beach end of Willow Avenue, where Jean and I are still living. It's truly a beach cottage. Big, wide, screened-in porch with a hammock at one end, awnings on all the windows, 3 bedrooms upstairs with 4 double beds. There was no bathroom upstairs, but that didn't worry anybody. Each bed had a chamber pot underneath or a covered enamel bucket along beside it. There was a big rainwater tank over the washroom, and the neighbors were free to draw rainwater whenever they wanted to wash their hair. We didn't have a garbage pickup, so we dug a big pit in an adjacent lot on Cedar Avenue and threw our bottles, cans, and food scraps there and burned our paper goods in a wire trash burner. Our neighbors across the alley were Mrs. Frances Wartig and her mother, Mrs. Fanny Heron Wingate. Mrs. Wartig was the Anna Maria postmaster, and Mrs. Wingate was known as the island poet. Mrs. Wartig told us her house was built in 1921, and ours was built in 1924. She knew a lot about island people and happenings, having been in city politics in the 1930s when she was mayor. There was no island water or sewer system. We had an electric pump and a shallow well. Water tested pure until the 1950s when more houses sprang up. Our kitchen sink had a grease tap with a drain field, and our septic tank had a drain field that ran under the garage and into the front yard. You've never seen such fine beets and greens that grew over that drain field. Thunderstorms were a regular occurrence, and the power failure during them was just as regular. At the first rumble of thunder, we would heat a kettle of water on the electric stove and read or play cards, sipping hot coffee during the storm. Birds were plentiful, lots of blue jays, mockingbirds, cardinals, and red-winged blackbirds in the marsh between our house and the beach. Flickers and woodpeckers delighted in a rat-a-tat-tatting on our awnings and metal garbage cans early in the morning, and lots of doves and sparrows, too. Dozens of crows invaded, leaving only a few doves. How I hate the crows! Among both sides of the marshy area were parallel sand dunes covered by sea oats, butterwood, beach morning glory, and daisies, inhabited by gopher turtles, rabbits, snakes, and quail. The marsh is now filled in with sand from many squalls and covered with vegetation. Once in a while I can see a gopher turtle and harmless snakes. This property is the City Gulf Front Park. The mosquitoes were fierce. We used citronella and had a palmetto swisher by every door to swish our legs, neck, and head. I always wore slacks and long-sleeve shirt when I hung the clothes out to dry. Jean and Elizabeth became teachers at the new Anna Maria Elementary School in Holmes Beach in the 1950s. They continued to live in the same house, but with a bathroom upstairs and a front porch enlarged and enclosed. We raised twin boys and a daughter here who love the island as much as Jean and I do. Our grandchildren visit us often, and they love the island too. Chapter 26, Wyatt Blasingame, Anna Maria author. In the late 1930s, Wyatt Blasingame, his wife Gertie, and daughter Peggy came to Anna Maria to spend the winter and never left. The following is an excerpt by Wyatt from the article Anna Maria, I Love You in the Ford Times. We came down on the train. Friends met us in Bradenton and drove us out. There was a long, rickety bridge that swayed like a swing when the car went across it. At the island end of the bridge was a small cluster of houses. Then, for 5 miles, the road twisted, for no apparent reason, between jungle on the right and one great white sweeping beach on the left, with the Gulf blue and green beyond it. There was a sign that said City of Anna Maria, with nothing whatsoever except the sign to indicate there was a city. 3 pheasants ran across the road. Some city. We rented a house on the bay with no nearby neighbors. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, bath, 3 mice, several giant Florida spiders, a chameleon, and a black snake. Our first morning, Gertie told me she was going back to New York. She didn't go. Before the end of the month, something happened to Gertie, who never before had seen an island. Gertie had found her affinity. In those days, fiddler crabs by the millions would retreat from the tides, going back and forth with a sound like the wind in dead leaves. For a week she was terrified of them. Then one day, in sheer desperation, she picked one up and put it on a fish hook and caught a 2-pound sheep's head. After that, you could have got her away from here with dynamite. Which is one of the strange things about the island. People love it, and I mean the word is something beyond mere liking, or they can't abide it at all. Usually it takes a short time to learn which. There was a time when most of us who loved her claimed, and not without some justification, that people who really loved this island had at least one thing in common. We were all a little cracked. We claimed this happily and pointed with pride to some of our better examples. The lady who would hold her dog up to the telephone so it could bark for a faith healer in Boston. The dog had a cold, and the lady didn't trust Florida veterinarians. The old lady with arthritis who swam nude because she couldn't get the full benefit of the water in a bathing suit. If the tide carried her down the beach, she might walk home again along the road, explaining placidly that no one could possibly take offense since we all understood the situation. We did. Everyone I knew wrote for a living, but no one paid the slightest attention to what I wrote, with the exception of one story. In the opening paragraph of this one was the statement that if you unscrew a screwball anywhere in the United States, blindfold him, turn him around twice, and turn him loose, he'll wind up at Anna Maria. Within 2 days after the magazine came out, everybody on the island had read the story, and most of them had mailed copies to their northern friends. Here, a man can have as much privacy as he wants, or he can have companions to whoop it up all night long. Even better, he can have as much of each as he wants when he wants it. For I've never known a place so free of group-made social restrictions. The individual can make restrictions for himself, of course, but he's also free to make his friends among any and all the people he wishes. And we have them here from every profession and every walk of life. The big difference between this island and a city is that here you can know any of them you want to know. The new and the old, the cracked and the uncracked. I love it. A longtime island resident and prolific writer of books, Wyatt was once described as a pundit of peace, who spoke out for reason and sanity like the conscience of a community. He wrote more than 800 short stories and magazine articles, 55 young adult books, and 6 novels. A former newspaperman and college instructor, he had a penchant for research. I try to write books so anybody can enjoy them, he said. A reserved man with a leathery face and bushy eyebrows, he didn't believe in writing down to kids. They can smell it if you do. What I do is try to gather the facts and try to make them interesting. If I do, the books will be read. I write the same way I do for adults, except I keep the sentences simpler. One year at his peak, he wrote 50 stories and was awarded the Junior Book of the Month award. He had a quick, dry wit, which he demonstrated on many occasions. If you plan to write for a living, he would say, for gosh sakes, marry for money. Writing wasn't easy. Typed on his personal word label was the phrase, With this typewriter I thee wed. I sweat blood when I write. I can write for a whole day and end up with fewer pages than when I started. It's possible to fall in love with the beach, he declared. The Gulf of Mexico is 200 feet from the front door of my home. In good weather, that is. In stormy weather, it may be unpleasantly closer. I particularly love the beach at night. In summer, lights flash here and there when someone wades knee-deep after crabs. In winter, I often walk for hours without seeing a single person. Offshore, the waves break into thin, quick lines of silver, eternally fading, eternally replaced. Sometimes from the wet sand under my feet, phosphorescent lights spurt like Roman candles, and always there's the sound of waves out of the cradle, endlessly rocking. Like I say, a man can get hooked living on a beach. Chapter 27. Radio and TV great Salty Saul. Salty Saul Fleshman first saw Anna Maria in 1920 from one of the favorite steamers. They sailed on Sunday excursions from Tampa to St. Petersburg and Anna Maria, continuing to the town of Manatee and up the Manatee River. He came to the island in 1923 as a Boy Scout attending a Tampa Bay area merit badge camp at the old Alexhurst Lodge in Bradenton Beach. In 1930, young Saul was playing drums in a dance band in an old pavilion on the island, and then in a small orchestra in the Manatee River Hotel in Bradenton. He went on to play with the Florida Symphony. However, his real love was broadcasting. At the age of 18 in 1928, he started with WDAE, which 7 years earlier had become Tampa's first radio station. At the same time, he was outdoor editor for the Tampa Times, the popular daily paper that owned WDAE. He loved to fish when he wasn't working. One longtime associate called him the fishing dean of all times. He served during World War II with the United States Coast Guard. When he came home, he went back to radio and the Times. He broadcast University of Florida games over 50 stations. Salty Saul was a natural for television. When WTVT bought the new medium in Florida's West Coast, he became sports director, always weaving fishing tales into the sports segment. For many years, Channel 13 dominated the area TV, with Saul and his sports in the public's mind and heart. He was never without a smile or a fishing hat on his balding head. Saul was great working with people, kind and supportive of everyone he met. He lived on the corner of North Shore Drive and Fern Avenue in a house designed by architect Saul Jr. Salty Saul lived permanent on Anna Maria Island for 10 years during the 1970s, and his picture is on the page before. Chapter 28. Snooks Adams, charter member of everything on the island. Willis H. Snooks Adams was born in Cortez on April the 24th, 1917, but home has always been Anna Maria Island. I was charter member of about everything that started here, he said. Assistant fire chief when the department started in Bradenton Beach, assistant chief of police in Bradenton Beach while I was working for the sheriff, all sorts of clubs and organizations and services. My family originated in North Carolina near Morehead City and Beaufort, Snooks said. They moved to Perico Island in 1875, where they worked as farmers and fishermen. My grandfather, William Thomas Billy Fulford, was one of the original settlers of Cortez. He and his brothers bought the Cortez Peninsula in the 1880s. My aunt named me Baby Snooks when I was born, after the Fanny Bryce character. When I got my hair cut, the name was shortened to Snooks. The name stuck. Even though I became an avid fisherman in later years, it had nothing to do with fishing. There was nothing on this island except a little bit in Anna Maria. Then in 1922, the bridge was finished, and Cortez Beach, Bradenton Beach, started to build. On this page there is a picture of Snooks, law enforcement officer, humanitarian, well known for his opinion on island happenings. Continuing. The only building there on Bradenton Beach before 1922 was where the bridge tender inn is now. It was Stafford's then. I was on the Cortez side when the bridge opened, and I was thunderstruck when a woman charged me a dime for a bottle of pop. Later, old man Stafford would give us kids pop and hand us coins to play his slot machines, but we couldn't take any money out. As for Cortez, those were my people. My Aunt Sally married Jack Moore, who ran the city pier in Anna Maria and opened a restaurant on Longboat Key. As a child, Snooks rowed boats to St. Petersburg where fishermen iced down their catches. They let me pump the water out of the boats, he said. He often swam a shortcut from Aunt Sally's house to the pier, despite warnings that the water was full of alligators. "I won't hurt 'em," he quipped. He went to Michigan in 1936 after high school, and a trucker hired him as a dispatcher in Chicago. Snooks joined the Navy on December the 14th, 1941, a week after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I served on destroyers, protecting the troop ships and the bigger warships at Pearl, but they were old stuff, and the new ones were at sea. During 4 years of war, he survived some of the most horrendous sea combats in the Pacific. He went ashore with the Marines at Guadalcanal to run their communications generators. He was in the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the first big sea battle of the Pacific War, where Snooks claims we Yanks shot down 500 or 600 Japanese planes in one day. Snooks came home in January 1946 and then moved to the island permanently in 1947. My family served in every war from the Civil War right up through Bosnia. There were 6 of us brothers serving at once, 4 of us in the Navy, 1 with General Patton and another in the Air Corps, flying B-17s. He was shot down and held as a prisoner of war in Germany. Snooks is proud of his copy of the Congressional Record. This is a tribute to the Adams family for the 6 brothers who served overseas in the United States Armed Forces at the same time during World War II. Snooks was Anna Maria Island's first law enforcement officer. He began in 1953 with the Manatee County Sheriff's Department. From 1964 to 1979, he was police chief of Holmes Beach. Snooks is best known on the island for starting Kids Day in the early 50s. Hundreds of kids attend the annual free fun event at the Bayfront Park. Cases of Cokes and hundreds of hot dogs delight the children every year. "I guess I've had a successful life," he reminisced. "I know it's been a happy one. My wife Liz and I wore out 2 or 3 boats traveling around Florida and wore out 2 or 3 vans traveling all over the country. The best day of our vacation was always the day we came home. There's no place as nice as here." Chapter 29. Miss Edie, the Island Millionairess. Miss Edie, a wealthy native of Troy, New York, helped Anna Maria Island when it was desperate for money. She bought City of Anna Maria bonds during the Great Depression of the 1930s and later canceled them in exchange for land near her home. Miss Edie burned $25,000 worth of municipal bonds, recalled Ernie Cagnina, a former Anna Maria mayor. The city deeded her the swale in front of her home on Beach Avenue, stated island historian Paula Tripp, whose husband Ted was mayor at the time. Her millions and her mansion, hidden among Australia pines, buttonwood trees, and dense foliage, provided a glimpse into an era when going to the seaside meant taking a 6-month vacation with a staff of servants in tow. Miss Ruth Hart Edie was guarded by a crusty, tight-fisted secretary companion who accompanied her on winter visits to her Anna Maria properties, starting in 1920. There's a picture of the millionaire's mansion at the bottom of this page. It had a red tile roof, and was filled with Italian and Spanish furnishings. It was one of a kind. Missy D was a political activist for women's rights. She was active in the Garden Club of America and contributed a great deal of money to save the California redwood trees. Missy D never married. She and her entourage set up housekeeping in Anna Maria every winter for 40 years. They are all remembered humorously and fondly by longtime island residents. Like many New Yorkers, she summered in Vermont. Miss Needy was the daughter of the inventor of printing ink used in United States currency. She was remembered as a kind but a very private person. She was also remembered as being rather rotund. She weighed about 225 pounds and was an avid angler. Every winter from the 1920s to the 1960s, she came to Florida in her chauffeur-driven Cadillac with her personal secretary and a staff that joined those already here looking after her properties. Her chauffeur's name was Miller, and his brother had a home on the island. Her home at 104 Beach Avenue was surrounded by other properties she owned on that street and on Park Avenue. One neighbor remembers old Mac, the gardener, always raking and burning leaves, keeping the land immaculate like a park. Miss Edie spent thousands of dollars just tending the grounds. It was a mansion at that time, Cagnini stated, recalling the red tile roof, Spanish-style home beyond the wrought iron gates. It was filled with Italian and Spanish furniture. Miss Edie's private-style generosity is remembered more fondly than the stinginess of her secretary. That secretary thought all the money was hers, remembers one Anna Marian who preferred not to be named. An example was recounted by Cagnina, who was the local grocery. It seems the secretary wanted Cagnina to charge the sales tax separately on Miss Edie's groceries so she could deduct it from her millionaire employer's income tax. Cagnina refused. It seemed like everyone was a character back then, a longtime resident said. One local sage told of Miss Edie's housekeeper, who lived in a small stucco house on Pine Avenue. One day she came to me and complained, saying, "You always close your drapes at night and I can't see in." Miss Edie died in the 1960s, a few years before her secretary. Information on Miss Edie came from Ella and Van Vetchen, Grands of Bennington, Vermont, who were personal friends of Miss Edie. And here's a final note from Carolyn Norwood. Writing this book has been work, but also a stimulating, enlightening, and enriching experience. During the years I have worked to promote Anna Maria Island Historical Society, I always knew I was doing something worthwhile that would be enjoyed for generations. This gave me incentive to keep going. A history book has been in the back of my mind for years. Would I dare? I asked myself. Friends encouraged me, and the time seemed right. Many have requested a book about Anna Maria Island. I'm proud to say that this is the first written history book, to my knowledge, about our beloved island. It would not have been possible without my partners, Andy Little and Betsy Atkinson. We had a lot of laughs along with our concentrated efforts to make the book the very best. I'm already looking for material for the sequel, The Next 50 Years. And in the back, there are a number of beautiful pictures. An aerial picture of the island in 1946 before the rod and reel pier was built. A picture looking north from Bradenton Beach with the bridge on the right, an aerial view taken in about 1948. Another 1948 shot, I beg your pardon, another picture that's taken about the mid-1950s, and you can see along the beach that there are groins that have been established that weren't there in the 1948 shot. And a picture in the foreground, the first wooden bridge linking Bradenton Beach to Cortez. It's looking west down Bridge Street to the Gulf, taken about 1948. A steamer an excursion for 950 people at the Anna Maria Beach docks, 1911. and people leaving the boat and going down Pine Avenue to the beach. Bathing scene in a postcard. Fun on the beach. And this beach photo was taken between the late 40s and the early 50s. It's probably 77th Street looking north. Called the Red Houses, these 5 homes, painted red, were built in 1913 along Gulf Boulevard between Magnolia and Pine Avenues. 4 of the houses, made of wood, are still standing. The Gulf Terrace restaurant was located on the Gulf Beach at the end of Bridge Street. This picture was taken in the early 50s when Jack Jones, third mayor of Bradenton Beach, was the owner. A picture of cars on the sandy Gulf Drive, taken in the 1930s after a storm washed sand across the road. A big problem back then was getting stuck in the sand. Pine trees form a beautiful archway along Park Avenue, Anna Maria. This picture was taken in 1941. The Anna Maria Motel was the first motel on the island, located near the North Point. It was owned and operated by Paul and Noreen Carlisle from 1948 until 1982. Their daughter, Margaret Chapman, ran it until 1989. I hope you've enjoyed this book, and this is the end.